Welcome to Lesson 2 of Learning Python. As I said in Lesson 1, sooner or later we are going to need our own VPS. So I have decided that I want to use my VPS because I want to save the work as we do it. Now you can use some of the services that I showed you in Lesson 1, but eventually you're still going to need a VPS because our end goal is for you to run a program that is going to trade automatically. So the first thing we need to do once we get our environment, our VPS, we need to find out and verify what version of Python we are using. Now we explicitly want to use Python 3. And many systems have both Python 2 and 3 on them simultaneously. So you must explicitly reference Python 3. And this is the version I will be working with and the version required for all of the code in this series. This is the minimum. If you have version 3.9 or 3.10, that's fine. But this is the minimum version. Now I have already created a folder on my drive with Lesson 1 in it. But before we get to Lesson 1, there's one other thing we need to check. And that is a program called pip3. We're not going to need it today, but we will need it. And it is important that you have it. If you get an error, then you need to use your VPS package manager and install the Python 3 pip program. It is important that it be the Python 3. Python 2 has its own version, and that won't work for our needs. So you must explicitly reference the Python 3 system. And mine already has it, so that's why it's given us a message of nothing to do. So now let's go into our work directory and go from there. Now I've copied the lesson into a file and put it in my directory, Lesson 1. And that is exactly where we left off last time, Lesson 1. Now I've created another file called template. Oops. And this has some very special commands in it. If I get the name right. Okay, these commands are specific to Linux, but they let me run the lesson as a command in my shell. That's important, and I'm going to demonstrate why. But let's first go through these two commands. These are both comments because they're not a part of Python, but they're very critical to Linux. The very first line tells Linux to use its environment and find the Python 3 language program. This is important because Linux doesn't know how to run Python. It doesn't speak Python. It speaks machine language. So the Python 3 program is going to take what we give it and convert it to machine language so Linux can run it directly. And we will be demonstrating that quite a bit. The second line, though, is probably the most confusing of all because it's the least intuitive. The coding describes the type of keyboard and language you are using in your program. We are going to use the Utf-8 coding or code page. This is a universal format that lets you share your program from America to Germany, France, Italy, Japan, Korea, wherever on the planet. And it doesn't distort the way the letters look. It tells the computer that if you have an English keyboard or a French keyboard, that the programming language itself is the same, even though that particular user might write his comments in his own native language. So this is critical and important that we have this in the system. The third thing is that we have to tell Linux that this is executable or runnable by the system. And this is a special command. You only need to run it once for this file, but it's still very important. Change mode, or turn this simple text file into an executable. Now let's demonstrate. For example, if I do Python 3, well, if I type it right, and I do lesson 1, we get what we gave it yesterday. That's the program we have. But now, what if I want lesson 1 to run like a command? So I'm going to type it won't work. Linux doesn't understand it, and it's not an executable program. So that starts today's lesson 2. First thing we're going to do is copy the template we just made to lesson 2. Now we can run lesson 2. Of course, there's nothing in it, so there's nothing to print. But that's going to change. Now you can use any text editor you want. It could be Midnight Commander, it could be Emacs, it could be V, Nano, Ed, or countless others on the market, and there are a plethora of text editors available. The most common is going to be Nano or V. You can get Midnight Commander installed on your machine if you want, but it's up to you to pick the text editor you want to use. I prefer Midnight Commander because it's a full-scale file manager, but you may not want all of that junk on a $1 machine. And yes, I did say a $1 machine. When you're starting and you're looking at your VPS, don't spend a lot of money. Don't do it. Get the cheap specials. $1. That's all you need. $1 VPS. You're not writing award-winning programs right now. Save the money for later on when we get to the bigger projects. Okay, now I'm going to show you the command you need for Midnight Commander. Type this in and press enter. And if you don't have it, it will install it for you. I use Midnight Commander extensively because it is not only an editor, but also a file manager, which we will cover the benefits of later on as we develop. But for now, let's just look at the very basic file editor. Okay, so MC Edit and then Lesson 2. So this is the blank file we just created. So now let's actually do some programming. The whole point of why we are here, to program. So remember from Lesson 1, comments. Always comment on your code. So we are going to ask for the closing price and give the stop loss price and we want stop loss and take profit values to be in the form of risk versus reward. Or reward versus risk, however you want to describe it. So if your stop loss is a 1 and your reward is a 2, then we want the reward to be 2 times the risk. So if our risk is 1%, then we want our reward to be 2%. So let's do it. Comments are important. Don't slack on them. Okay, now a recap on variables. They are simply names that have a meaning to you, that you want to remember information in. Now, as you remember from Lesson 1, when we use the input command, it gives us a string of characters or just a string. We want a number though. So we need to have that string converted to a number. Now you'll notice that I've actually taken the 2 steps of Lesson 1 and made it into 1 step here. Yes, you can stack commands in Python. And you will see this type of stuff very common, where input is converted in 1 line. So we now have our closing price. Now we need our risk. For that, we want risk equals. Now again, we need to convert it to a float. So what I like to do is I take the first step, then I take the second step, because the system does count parentheses. So you need to make sure your open parentheses match your closing parentheses. Now the one thing here that you need to be careful with, you don't want the user giving you a % sign. So you'll need to be sure to tell them to put only a number. Eventually we'll be able to deal with that, but right now let's just keep it simple. Okay, so we have the number, we're converting it to a float. So now if the person puts a 1 in there, that would be 1% of the risk. So we need to convert the number into a percentage. And that is simply just dividing by 100. So that's our risk. So if the user puts a 1 for risk, then the computer will see 0.01. Now let's work on our reward, which we said we wanted to be 2 times the risk. Okay, so now let's do some more math. We want our stop loss to be the closing price and then minus the percentage of the current closing price. So for example, if our closing price is $10 and we want 1% risk, then we want the $10 times the risk, or 10 cents, to be subtracted from the current closing price, which will put our stop loss at $9.90. Yes, there's all sorts of cute ways of doing this in 100 of different directions. Work your way through the problems with simplicity. The easier it is to figure out the problem, the less likely you are going to have mistakes. Cutesy solutions end up with problems in the future. Simplicity is always the best way when programming. Keep it simple, keep it understandable, and keep it easy to read. So we want our take profit to be our closing price. And we want to add the difference of the reward. So here you have it. We have the stop loss and the take profit. Now let's actually give this information to the user and some nice little print statements. Nice little text to let them know what we're actually giving him, and then the actual numbers. Now, I like the good news first, so let's print to take profit first. Remember that your variables must be consistent as you're programming. So whatever you use above, use below. Case is important. Take your time and watch what you're doing. And even then, you're still going to make typing mistakes, as you see me do it all the time. Okay, so here we have it. We're going to display the closing price, the take profit, and the stop loss prices. Now, the other thing you need to be aware of is to save your work frequently based upon your editor. So, double check everything. Closing price, we want it to be a floating point number or a number with a decimal place. Your risk needs to be a floating point number, but we wanted a percentage, so we need to divide that number by 100. Your reward will be 2 times the risk. We want to calculate the stop loss as the closing price minus the percentage of the closing price. The take profit is the closing price plus the percentage of the closing price based upon the reward. Okay, save your work, exit, and now we will see if everything works. Lesson 2, as a command. Okay, closing price. Let's have 19,000. Okay, the risk percentage number only. Let's have a 1.5% risk. And we have a mistake. And of course, we have a typing mistake. Where is our typing mistake? It is right here. We do it again. Oops, wrong command. Of course, you got to be able to hit the buttons right, but oh well. So lesson 2, let's try this again. Okay, 1.5, and hopefully it didn't work. Let's see what the error is. Take profit not defined. Remember what I said about checking your spelling for your variables, which means somewhere I did another typo. Save it again, and we try again. And finally, we have success. So if the closing price is 19,000, then our take profit of 3% is going to be $19,570. But if the price goes against us, then we want to get out at $18,715. So as you can see, the program works. And yes, there are a few typing errors along the way, and yes, you're going to make them. It's just a matter of going back and figuring out where the mistakes are and taking your time. Frustration can get the better of you very easily, especially in the beginning. And there are any number of things that will cause mistakes, from being not used to a new keyboard to just having a keyboard or an internet connection that can do weird things. Your programming environment is never going to be perfect. And this is just simply a matter of how we proceed with the environment we have. It can be done, it can be doable, and you see me do it right here live, mistakes and all. Now, where can this program go from here? Well, it's easy. Let's try it again, 19,000. Let's have a risk of 3%. So whatever our budget is, 3% is going to be our risk. And there we have the numbers. Now, what can we do with this? Well, we can now ask the user for the budget, and we can find out how much money we're going to make if we win the trade, and how much money we're going to lose if we lose the trade. So let's take that with this lesson. We've got the first part. Now, let's ask the user what their budget is for the position. We specifically want to know, how much does the user want to buy? We don't want their whole budget, just what they want to buy. Now, like above, this needs to be a floating point number. And we need to actually put a comment here. And then we want to display how much they could profit or lose based upon this information for this trade. Okay, so we have it. Now, we have the buy amount. Now we need to have the win. That is going to be take profit times the buy amount. Or is it? Let's think about this before we go on. We might need to actually do a little bit more math. Take profit variable is on the basis of the closing price. So that's 10 cents. But is that accurate? If our buy amount is $10 and the closing price is $19,000, that's not going to be accurate. So even though this looks logical, it's actually wrong. What we actually need to do is take our buy amount and then multiply it by the reward amount the way we did take profit. So our buy amount needs to be multiplied by reward. The reward percentage specifically. So if our buy amount is $10 and our reward is a 0.02 or 2%, then our win amount is going to be 20 cents. So now our lose or a loss amount is going to be the same way. It's going to be buy amount times the risk. So if our $10 position goes into a loss, because our loss is 1% of the trade, then our balance or our buy amount for our position is going to go down. So now let's actually do something with this. Okay, first of all, let's tell the user how much they'll win or how much their profit will be. Okay, now we need to figure out what the position size will be after the winning amount is added. So basically, if our buy amount is $10, then we add the winnings to it. Our total amount should be $10.20. So we will put winning position. For that, we're simply going to have buy amount plus win. Now here, let's look at the print statement a little closer. We're actually putting text on the screen. We're putting a number on the screen. We're putting more text on the screen. And we're doing embedded mathematics. Print statement is incredibly versatile. Now we're going to do the same thing with the loss. Same thing, but this time it's going to be buy amount minus the loss. Okay, let's double check everything. Okay. Save the work, exit the editor, run the lesson again. Now let's give the closing price of $19,000. Let's have a risk of 1.5%. How much do we want to buy of the asset? Let's buy $100. And we have an error. Yes, it happens. Let's go see what the error is. Spelling, as always. Try this again. $100 position. And if we win the trade, we will win $3, and our winning position will be a total of $103. If we lose the trade, we will lose $1.50, and that will leave us with a position amount of 98.5. So as you can see, there are a lot of ways that this simple process can really help in terms of trading in terms of building on this and in terms of directions that you can proceed. I'm sure by now your mind is racing with risk versus reward. What happens if you were to ask the user for a different reward value? So instead of just an absolute 2 times the risk, what if the user wanted 1.75 times the risk? What would that do to the numbers? With this lesson, you have more than enough information to actually be able to modify your program to be able to actually ask the user what amount they want for the reward and be able to actually see what it does. The program is really not that complicated, and that's the whole point about programming. When you think about what you're trying to do, keep it simple. Think about the steps in a simple approach. That way, as you begin to develop the program, every part of it stays simple. So when you have typing errors like what I had, or something happens that you don't expect, it's easy to go to, look at, fix, or rethink about the problem. Because one of the biggest things you're going to run into with programming is what you think the problem is not going to be the same way the machine is going to see the problem. And as we progress, that will become more apparent. But for now, this lesson is a good one in that it shows how to combine different elements that we've already seen from lesson 1. Being able to do more complex math, being able to input more information, and being able to get information out of what we give it in a useful way. Now, as we continue and we begin to look at the ability to actually pull price data down from an exchange, we will get even more options and ideas of how to proceed. But we need to build on those steps slowly and consistency with basic principles. Play around, think about your risk reward, your take profits. There's all sorts of stuff that this opens the door to. Don't be afraid to experiment. You're not going to break the machine. Programming is literally about experimenting and learning through each of the steps. If you have any questions, let me know, leave a comment. Like, share, subscribe if you're not. Until next time.